lesson on walking bass lines aimed at beginners. So I've done one lesson really aimed at the basics of the walking bass line for absolute beginners. In other words, if you haven't got a clue where to start. Now, as promised in that video, today I'm just going to take a little look at a couple of other variations of our walking bass line. Now, this is a bass ukulele, but this lesson will work just as well for bass guitar, upright or double bass, or the electroacoustic bass ukes. So if you haven't seen it already and you're new to a walking bass line, I highly recommend going and having a look at my first lesson, walking bass line basics. I explain a lot in there about what a walking bass line is, how the chords work, and how you can keep it really, really simple. What I want to do today though is just go a little bit further, and I'll show you a different chord progression, and we'll look at the chords again, in other words the notes from the chord, but I'll also introduce using scales and chromatic notes into our walking bass lines. So still keeping it really simple. There are so many great resources out there on jazz chords, on walking bass lines. By all means, go and check out things to do with bass guitar as well, all right? But as I said, I'm going to keep it simple. So first of all, what I covered in the first lesson were root notes, in other words, the tonic note, the first note of the chord, as well as adding thirds and then roots and fifths, and then the main triad notes, the notes from the chords. This time looking at scales and chromatic notes as well, just to give us a few more ways of playing our walking bass lines and make them sound even better. So the chord progression for today's lesson, again, it's a nice jazzy number. We're still in the key of C, but using a few more chords this time. So I'll quickly run through them. Don't worry about all the numbers and things. Hopefully it'll become obvious as we start playing them. So the first chord, C major 7, has got a C, an E, a G and a B. A minor 7 has got an A, a C, an E and a G. D minor 7, D, F, A and C. G7, G, B, D and F. E minor 7, E, G, B and D. And lastly, the A7 chord, which has got an A, C sharp, E and G. All right, notice the difference between the A minor 7 and the A7 chord. Now all I'm doing there, going through the names of the notes in the chord, is hopefully giving you some ideas. You should know the names of the notes on your fretboard by now. I've gone over those in my beginner lessons, and I explained a lot more in detail about the chords and using thirds and fifths in the first walking bass lesson. So this time I'm going to do the same as before. I've got my backing tracks ready, and there will be 4 brand new backing tracks going onto the channel the same time this video is uploaded. Different speeds as well, from quite slow 80 beats per minute all the way up to 140. But remember, you can change the speed of the videos as well. Just click in the settings or the little cog below the video. So the new chord progression, nothing to panic about, even though there are a few more chords. If nothing else, stick to the main root, in other words, the big letters, okay? And do what you did before and just add thirds or just add fifths, or jump in with what I'm about to show you now. So the chord notes, okay? You can see below now tabs and notes. Okay, and I will be doing very, very soon some videos on how to read music. Right, let's hear one of the new backing tracks. And again, what I'm playing you here are just suggestions to get you started. The whole point of walking bass lines are they're meant to be improvised, and you can get into the habit of playing patterns and formulas a little bit too much. You don't want to do that. You want to be mixing it up so it sounds a lot more natural when you're playing. So 120, I think, to start. And so on, okay? And these are just guides, all right? And hopefully when we do the scales and the chromatic in a minute, you can really start to mix it up, okay? Remember, it's about the rhythm, all right? You're better off putting less notes in and keeping the rhythm nice and steady than fluffing notes or making mistakes because you're not ready for the next chord, okay? So always keep it simple. Your job is to keep the rhythm steady. Right, so the next little variation, using scales. I'm not talking about things you find on fish. In music, a scale is a set of notes, generally ascending or descending when you play them, and it depends on your key signatures as to what notes you play in the scale. I'm going to do a theory lesson on key signatures. It's a lot easier, all right? But in this case, what you need to know with a scale, okay, are the notes that are in the main key signature or the notes that are in the chord, all right? So we're in the key of C. If I just play you a C scale just for a minute to give you an idea. Now that's a major scale. Major scales sound happy. That's a minor harmonic scale, all right? But you're getting the idea. You can get pentatonic scales, minor melodic scales, and then you're into your modes and things as well. Yeah, I don't want to fry your brains with that, all right? But basically a scale, imagine it going up a little staircase and coming back down a little staircase. If we're playing the chords or the arpeggios, you tend to jump notes. So, whereas before I was playing C, E, G for the main notes of my walking bass line, this time I'm going to go C, then I'm going to go to my next note, D, then my next note, E. Now I still want to try and keep my notes from the chord, so I'm just going to jump to G. Alright, so that's just the first chord that I've played for this scale. Okay, I'll do it again. C, D, E, G, which leads us very nicely onto the next chord of A minor 7, and then we're going to just come back down the scale. Alright, so it should go A, G, E, then down to C. So again, I've got A, C and E in there, and by just popping that second G, the second note, A, G, okay, it's sort of giving us a little bit of a scale at the beginning. Then the next chord, D minor 7, I'm doing the same pattern again. I'm going up my first note, second note, so it's D, E, then F, not F sharp, all right, we're in a minor D minor 7. So D, E, F, then we jump to our A, which leads quite nicely onto the G. All right, I'll just play that without a backing track or anything for a minute, just so you can see going up and going down. Imagine like a staircase. jump down to the next line of music, our E minor 7. I'm following the same pattern here, all right? So it's going to go E, next note is F, next note is G. So there's our little bit of a scale, E, F, G, up to our B. And that leads us nicely into A7. Okay, now I've done a nice little octave there for a reason. I want to get that C sharp in and then E. So I'm not actually playing any scales in that bar. I want to make sure that it's obvious the A minor 7 is different to the A7. So I'm going to go from that second line, starting with the E minor 7. D minor 7, we're going back to our scales, but we're going down. D, C, B, A, G, A, B, and then up to D to lead in back for our first C again, okay? If you're not sure, those little double lines and double dots on the end of each line, that means repeat. In other words, play round and round. Once through for the scale chord progression then without the backing track, just to give you an idea. And so on. Right, let's try it with the backing track. I'll go a little bit slower this one, 100 beats per minute, just for you to hear the notes a bit better. I was being a bit naughty then. I was putting in just the odd little passing note in there, okay, just to add variety. But you only do that when you're absolutely confident with the rhythm, and you don't put too much, okay, because you don't want to take away from your nice walking bass line. And remember, with scales, the scale of a bass ukulele is much shorter than, say, for example, a bass guitar or a double bass. In other words, you can actually get a lot more notes going higher up the fingerboard. I'm keeping this really simple. I'm trying to stick to the first 4 or 5 frets. All right, this is aimed at beginners. And of course, if you know all the notes up here, further up the fingerboard, there is nothing stopping you playing it all up here, okay? I'm just trying to keep it nice and simple. Okay, chromatic. All right, now then, chromatic notes, you can get a chromatic scale. In other words, you're playing every single note. If you were playing it on the piano, it would be the black and the white notes. In this case, it's every fret. But basically, chromatic notes in this instance are notes that don't fit in the key signature or the scale, okay? And they tend to be sharps and flats at the moment because we're in the key of C. The key of C has no sharps or flats. Now, I did mention a moment ago about the A7 chord. That has a C sharp in it. But again, I'm talking about something a little bit different here. Okay, if you can see below, let's just look at this first bar, C major 7. Now you can see the last note of that bar. Even if you don't read notation, you think, that's weird, it's got a hashtag. That means sharp, okay? So in this case, I'm going to play my first 3 notes of the triad, C, and then G. And then a really nice little way of doing it is putting a chromatic note in next to the next root note. Now, our next root note is an A. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to play a G sharp. In other words, it's the note in between G and A. Sorry, the note in between G and A is the first fret. Okay, let's see how that sounds. So we've got C, E, G, G sharp, then A, back to E, C. Then my next chromatic note, I'm going to put a C sharp in because it's next to our D, which is our next root note. All right, I'm trying to keep this so that it works easily when you play, and you don't want to start putting weird and wonderful chromatic notes in. So a really good pattern to follow would be your triad, your first, your third, and your fifth notes of the scale, and then the chromatic next to your next root chord. Now it just so happens in this case, both of them were the note in between the previous note and the root note. Let's listen to that again. The next bar, D minor 7, I'm aiming for a G, so I'm going to go with my G sharp. Again, it's next to it. Then I'm landing on my G. Okay. Now I've put in a little, I've actually written out a rhythm there. You wouldn't normally see this because you would normally just have a chord chart. You'd just have G7 written and you would be expected to fill in the other notes. But I'm trying to be as helpful as possible here. As somebody who has always read music, I actually find it much easier to have the notes there. All right. But in this case, I thought by writing them out gives you an idea. So I'll do those last two bars again for a moment. D minor 7 and G7. G sharp. So for the G7 bar, I did, and I tucked in a little note in between, okay? We're in a swing tempo. If you're not sure what swing tempo means compared to a straight tempo, go and check out a video I've done quite recently for both bass ukulele and ukulele about swing tempos. Okay, let's just play that first line then of our chromatic notes using this new pattern. So looking at the bottom line, the E minor 7 chord. First three notes, E, G, B. The fourth note's a B flat. All right, it's got that funny little symbol by it. Don't panic, all right, about flats and sharps and things. B flat, another name is A sharp. I'm not even going down that route today, enharmonic names, all right. Third fret, so it should sound, which leads us nicely onto our A7, C sharp again. I'm just popping in a little chromatic D sharp as a quaver at the end of that, okay, so it'll sound, leading us onto our D, the root note for our D minor 7, and then leading us on to a nice G7 before we go back. So last two bars, D minor 7, G7, okay, which then leads us back to the start of the whole chord progression. And again, you know, there's nothing wrong with just playing the roots. And so on, okay? keeping it simple, but these are just suggestions of ways of playing a walking bass line if you really haven't got a clue where to start. So with a backing track, and so on. Now, practicing a walking bass line sounds and is so much easier, but it sounds better when you're either using some kind of rhythm, drum machine or a backing track, or using the chords to follow the progression. Same way as the backing tracks don't sound great until you add the bass. And just a little bit of a mix and match of all of them, and I'm not going to say it was on purpose, there was a little mistake in there actually, but I kept going. That is one of the major things you need to learn as a musician. We all make mistakes, every single musician, but it's how you deal with it at the time. Generally poker face and keep going. All right, the rest of the musicians are not going to stop because you've made a mistake, okay? Keep going. I said poker face then. Bass face. It's a thing. I spent years wondering why the few pictures of me playing bass instruments, whether it's double bass or bass guitar, I always look like I'm about to burst into tears. And of course, the more I've filmed myself playing, I can see I have a typical bass face. Very serious, concentrated. It's not, I don't do it on purpose at all. In fact, I actually have to think about smiling when I'm playing the bass. But it's not just me. You may have noticed it with yourselves doing it, but I guarantee, go and watch most bass players. There is such a thing as a bass face. Okay, so the actual backing track, I will just very quickly run through what's on there. You can see, first of all, the tempo or the speed, 80 beats per minute, 120 beats per minute. I've put the chords that are used. The first 3 letters of each chord, the main triad, I've tried to keep in red so they're obvious. But obviously if it's a 7th chord, in fact they're all 7th chords, I've added those as well. And on the other side of the page, it's not massively big, I'm afraid. It's as big as I could make it. They are just the examples that I've played in today's lesson. They are only suggestions. Walking bass lines are meant to be improvised, okay? The idea is that you start to get the feel of it, and then you can see the chord name and you can play whatever walking bass line you like, okay? And I shouldn't forget the little moving blocks as well, just to make it a little bit easier for you to play along to. So, walking bass lines for beginners, more. The first lesson I went over the absolute basics, just using the root notes, roots and thirds, roots and fifths, and the notes from the chords. This lesson I've gone over continuing using the notes of the chords, because that's by far the most important thing, but also introducing playing some scales into your walking bass lines and some little chromatic notes. A little bit of rhythm, but keep it steady. That's your job. I do hope this lesson has helped. Don't forget there are backing tracks to go with this at different speeds as well. But as always, if you've got a comment or a question, please feel free to leave it below. Give us a like if you've enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos. Thank you for watching.